A journey that began thousands of years ago continues to find new meaning on the big screen. Oscar-winning director Christopher Nolan's latest film, The Odyssey, has brought an ancient classic back to life. Shot entirely on IMAX for the most high-resolution pictures and immersive experience, this cinematic first has captivated moviegoers around the world, including me. What is the story really about? Is it simply Odysseus' journey home? And what if he doesn't actually want to go back? What do I mean? Welcome to this special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, coming to you from Beijing. I had the pleasure recently to sit down with Christopher Nolan himself and Oscar-winning actor Matt Damon, who plays Odysseus in the film. Watch.
What if I can't?
For me, when I saw it, that was what brought a tear to my eye.
It's one of the, to me, the great ideas in Chris's adaptation.
3, 2, 1, action!
Before we get into the more serious questions, really one curiosity question. How did you manage such real effects of the Cyclops and Scylla in the movie? Were they also physical filmmaking?
There's quite a bit of physical filmmaking in embracing the fantasy elements. Obviously, we have to use every trick in the book. So there's puppetry, there's animatronics, there's CG, there's everything. But what we did try to do with our visual effects team is film as much in camera as possible. So we tried to be in real places, on real boats or in a real cave, with real things for the actors to react to. And then gave it to the visual effects artists afterwards to enhance it and make it what it needed to be. Because the challenge is to maintain the tone of the film. The film has a grounded tone, so you want the fantasy elements to fit in with that and not feel like they were wandered in from another film.
Well, I certainly was taken in, absolutely. I felt like I was a child. Everything was coming to me in such scale and force that it was inescapable, if I can use that word. The emotions and the sensation, and especially when it comes to up-close shots, the dramatic scenes of the actors and the actresses. I could almost hear their breathing. I could almost see the pause. What was it like to use IMAX to do that kind of capturing?
Well, it's working with larger, heavier equipment, which we've done for years in the action scenes with IMAX, but applying that to the characters speaking, it makes you think very carefully about where the camera's going. And that's a thing that I've incorporated into my process with my director of photography, Hoyte van Hoytema. Spent a lot of time thinking about the three-dimensional aspect of where you put the camera, how close you bring the audience to the character in a dramatic moment. The wonderful thing about large format film is you get a very, very beautiful appreciation of the faces and the eyes, you know, the light on the eyes and things like that, the colors in the skin and everything. And so it brings you very close into a very intimate relationship with the actors in a really interesting way. But the cameras are, as I say, heavy and cumbersome. So there's a lot of mechanics that had to go into figuring out how to have two people talking with a giant camera, you know, right there. But it was a very exciting thing to start having the performers work in that way. And then seeing the results on the big screen. You're in a relationship with the characters in the film that you've never seen before.
Absolutely. And I could almost tell when the lens was shifting between the two characters when the conversation was going on. So very much you're present, or the cinematographer, Mr. Hoyte.
Very much.
Very much.
Very much.
Yeah.
The wonderful thing with Hoyte is he has an incredible eye. He's an artist, but he's also an engineer. He loves a mechanical challenge. He loves to figure out how to change the technology and use the technology. So for the lighting for those scenes, for example, they're all lit by firelight. And he found a way to construct from nothing, you know, these LED lighting pyramids that he used essentially, you know, video clips of fire that could be played back using these LEDs that are exactly the same color temperature. So they have the flicker and the warmth of firelight. So we're lighting the faces and lighting the whole scene, or in the case of the sack of Troy, the entire city with firelight. That means as a director, I can point my camera anywhere. You know, I've got a three-dimensional reality that I'm putting the actors into, and then we're able to shoot it as real.
We as filmmakers, we're not supposed to be comfortable. We're supposed to present the audience with the best experience possible. So all our effort was all in service of trying to put our audience, in our shoes and experience something extraordinary.
Maybe people have asked you this question, the maximum single reel is like, 2 to 3 minutes. You can stop the actors and actresses. What about the waves, the whirlpools, the movement of the ships? How do you do that?
It's for the sort of out and about action scene. So when you're on a boat or when you're into the Scylla and Charybdis sequence, these action scenes, it's not a problem because the camera can shoot for almost 3 minutes. And with the rhythm of the way action sequences are put together, we tend to shoot them in very short bursts, at most 20 or 30 seconds. And very often the cuts are very quick. Really where it becomes a drawback is in the dialogue scenes. Because if you've got an 8-page dialogue scene between Odysseus and Penelope, Matt Damon and Anne Hathaway, and I talked to them about it beforehand and said, well, how do we want to do this? Do we want to stop the scene and then do the beginning again and do multiple takes and then do the second half of the scene? Or do we want to do the first half of the scene,
freeze,
stop, hold, reload the camera, and then carry on? And that was the way we decided to do it. And it worked very well. And I think part of what we hadn't expected and the reason it worked well for performance was because of those mechanical limitations. The crew, everybody around was incredibly focused on the quiet, on the actors, on the mood, because they knew they had to maintain it. And so I think there was actually an exaggerated sense of focus on performance and on the moment that I think the actors really used that space that was created by that. There's a tremendous sense of focus when you run a film camera on set, whether it's the actors, whether it's the technicians, everybody's come together in that instant.
I just had the feeling that time came to a stop. How about the music? I mean, it's the very first time that I hear the gongs and the synths, creating this very, almost a little creepy to underscore the drama of the scene. What was the thinking behind it? And it's a kind of futuristic music.
What's interesting about it is it's using the most ancient of instruments as well as the most modern. And all of that is in service of something that I talked to Ludwig about. Ludwig Göransson, who's the composer I've worked with twice before. And I came to him before we shot the thing, and he said, what I want to do in the telling, I want to create an earthy and grounded and accessible telling of this story. And so I'm saying to the actors, we're not going to do pretend British accents. We're not going to look at the sort of elevated speech of Hollywood of the 50s and 60s. We're going to try and do something a little fresher and a little more immediate. And from the musical point of view, to me, that means not using an orchestra, not using the 19th century romantic tradition of orchestral music, string-based, that's sort of the bedrock of movie scoring. And Ludwig, what he did was he started to use the tactile elements that appear in the film. So things like gongs, bronze, it's a film about the Bronze Age, and there's metal there. It's very important to telling the story. So he starts to gather together sounds that actually that create a soundscape of the environment we're filming. There's a relationship between the sounds he's using and what you're seeing on screen visually that really starts to bind together. The music sort of emerges from that in a very unique and special way. I'm really thrilled with what he did in incorporating ancient instruments like the lyre, the stringed instrument that no one really can know exactly how it was played, but there are experts we found who have devoted their lives to figuring out how they think that would be played. And the aulos, the same thing. It's this twin pipe instrument. Very unique sound and very emotional sound, I think. It's something that really helps you access the emotions of the characters in a really profound way. Yeah, I think everybody who worked on the score did a remarkable job under Ludwig's direction.
First thing that people would expect when you go to see a movie of this scale, sit in a movie theater, is to hear the sound of a big cinematic orchestra. And you've seen that before, you've heard that before. In order to create this completely original world, I also had to get out of my comfort zone and find sounds that I haven't worked with before.
Well, I have to ask you a question on behalf of my husband. Earlier this morning, he said, ask him this question, why did he choose to do this old story?
Because it's the oldest story. In Western literature, it's a foundational myth, a foundational epic. In a way, it gives you the story model that infuses so many other stories, including a lot of the films I've worked on in the past that deal with very similar dynamics and movements. And As a filmmaker, what you're looking for is something to challenge yourself, something to challenge the audience, something they haven't seen before. And weirdly, even the Greek mythology is so important to Western culture. It really hadn't been addressed in modern films. And so for a filmmaker, that's a very interesting gap. You want to take that and kind of put your stamp on it.
What is your stamp? What is the one that you're most proud of? Because the adaptation, sometimes quite a breakaway from the original poem. I've noted down, for instance, the lotus flower. Yeah, which is very instrumental in the development of the film as well. Athena, right? The character of Athena, and then the brooch, and then the character of Sinon, and so on and so forth. Pick one of these and help me understand, or help us understand.
The lotus flower is something that a lot of people remember from the poem. They're familiar with that idea of the lotus eaters. But when you come to examine the poem, it's just a very short episode that doesn't really connect with anything. It doesn't really do anything. But I wanted to incorporate it into the A story, into the main story. And so I actually made it a bigger element than it is in the poem. So sometimes you're doing that, other times you're having to minimize things.
Achilles, totally gone.
There's no time to deal with that. there are various different things, like particularly when you go to Hades, he's meeting Achilles, he's meeting various other people. I had to choose the people who are important to the rest of the story. And at times it also means adding characters. So Sinon, for example, is a character from the Aeneid, not from the Odyssey. But his function in the story seemed very, very important to Odysseus' emotional journey. So I'm drawing on that. I'm drawing on Aeschylus as well for the story of Agamemnon, which is a more brutal and a more specific and fleshed out version of the Agamemnon story than you get in the Odyssey. But I felt like the combination of some of Aeschylus and some of Homer and the way they would interact could be pretty fascinating. And that's really one of the great joys of adaptation, is you're building on this great work that has so much excellent stuff in it, but you also have all of these other writers, all of these other cultural interpretations of this material for thousands of years, from Aeschylus to Tennyson to all of these different interpreters in a way. Wasn't that different to working on the Batman films? When I did the Dark Knight trilogy, I was the beneficiary of 75 years of artists and writers who interpreted the character of Batman. You get to adapt that larger thing, and in terms of the Odyssey, that's 3,000 years worth.
You've done absolutely amazing, I think, in terms of the storyline, how you wove everything together in a very tight and meaningful way. I have to talk about the dog, because everybody talks about the dog, Argos, and I must confess, that's when my eyes teared up. And that's when Charlize, she said when she first watched that film, that scene was when she got the most emotional. Tom Holland, the actor who played Telemachus, his eyes teared up too. Was it intentional, or did it just came like that?
It's a moving part of the story. I think all of us, who love animals and people love dogs, reuniting with the dog who's stayed alive to meet his master. There's something very moving about that. And I think because it involves an animal, it bypasses any form of prejudice or analysis of the emotions or politics of the situation. It's just a very, very simple idea of loyalty, of a bond that was forged, when this dog was a puppy, and that, we try to show. And it was a very important thing for me to get across, because I also think the way we use it in the film, it's a trigger for emotion that actually relates to the characters as well, which is really about the reuniting of father and son. It's sort of giving you permission to feel something in the rest of the scene. So it sort of primes that, emotionally in a very accessible way, I think.
Did you expect that, this emotional force in that very simple scene when the dog wagged his tail and then it kind of became still, right? In that second, Telemachus realized it was his father who came home, and the emotional effect it had on people, watching. Out of all the scenes, all the trouble, all the hardship you went through, it was the dog tail.
When I read the poem, I was, coming to it as an adult, coming to it with the eyes of, okay, would this make a film? I was enjoying it. I was so wrapped up in it. But it was when I got to the moment with Argos that I knew, no, this is something I really connect with emotionally. This is something that could really work for an audience. And as we put that moment together, very late in the day, editorially, my editor, Jen Lehman, myself, we decided right at the last minute to include the flashback to Argos as a puppy. And for me, when I saw it, that was what brought a tear to my eye. It was that contrast with the dying dog. You know, I find it very, very moving. But really, the significance is it represents that wider journey, that idea of nostos, that idea of homecoming, that then pushes forward into the relationship between father and son.
Well, I did notice when the puppy came out, there was, oh, in the cinema.
Very nice, very beautiful puppy, yeah.
Yeah, so it worked, absolutely worked. How do you comment, one sentence to comment on Matt Damon, Tom Holland, and Hathaway, of course, Samantha Morton,
Yeah,
if you
I
can.
mean, it's an incredible cast, and it's an incredible starry cast of people you want to see on film. They're doing their best work. I'm so pleased and so proud to have been involved in what they did and to have brought this group of people together, because I just think it's one of the great casts. I feel very, very lucky to have been able to direct them.
Well, certainly there's a lot for people to digest, but I think the signs are very good. People are finding it very interesting. So congratulations.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Very best. I really enjoyed your performance yesterday. I'm going to start by asking you about screenplay, because you yourself has done some wonderful screenplay writing job. What stands out for you in this endeavor?
Chris is a phenomenal writer, and I think because he's so revered as a director, sometimes people overlook that. I've read now 3 of his screenplays and been in 3 of his movies, and it's always striking to me how similar the film is to the screenplay in terms of how each beat plays out exactly as he intended. He thinks so deeply about the movie before the crew ever shows up to shoot it. Homer's Odyssey jumps around in time quite a bit, and Chris's movie jumps around in time, but all of that is exactly as it was written in the screenplay. There are a lot of wonderful themes that he took from Homer's poem.
Can you give an example, one?
Homer's Odyssey is about homecoming, it's about family, it's about love, it's about war, it's about death, it's about regret, it's about coming of age, it's about so many things. And I think that's why the story's been kept alive for 3,000 years, because it resonates emotionally with people when they come in contact with it, no matter where they are in their life. And that's the beauty of the story.
What struck me yesterday when I was viewing it in the IMAX cinema was the scene you said, let me be tied to the post so that I can hear and survive, be the first man to do that. In terms of acting in front of an IMAX camera, was it anyway technically challenging when you do a scene like that?
It's a noisy camera.
Still noisy after the technical adaptation?
Well, the technical adaptation was for the quiet scenes. And so that box that would go around the camera was so heavy, we couldn't take it on the boat. So the siren song I was hearing was the IMAX camera.
But you made it look very real. We thought you were being tormented by the sirens.
Chris, very wisely, the morning we shot that, he was waiting for me on the dock before we left. Normally he would go ahead with the camera boat so that they would be ready on the boat when we got there. And on that morning he was waiting for me. And he said, Hoyte and I were talking and we think we should start with you. And that's the emotional backbone of this scene. And I want to shoot till we're happy and then we'll get the other pieces. And what he did in doing that was, I knew I had an hour on this boat ride that I could sequester myself from everybody else and go get my mind right so that I could step off the boat and go right into work. And it was a real gift. He understands the actor's process well enough to know that I'd be thinking about, well, when is this scene coming up, and trying to manage my energy for the whole day. And what he did was he basically gave me a curtain time like they do in the theater. You know, at 8 o'clock the show begins, you know, and he basically said, yeah, in 1 hour we start with you. And he also said we shoot till we're happy, which was a way of saying, don't worry, we're gonna shoot. You're going to have plenty of attempts at this.
Yeah, so that you're not worried about, you know, being in top form in 1 or 2 takes.
So much of the job is about relaxation. And when you hold on too tightly, you can actually do yourself a disservice. So he gave me the permission to relax and know that I would have plenty of time.
One of the big early scenes when Penelope slapped you, right, when you told her to marry someone else in time. Was that design, was that meant to be, or did she?
Yeah, it was in the script.
But it looked very real, very spontaneous.
Yeah, well, Annie's so wonderful because the slap is spontaneous for Penelope. She doesn't know she's going to hit him until he says it, and it just comes out of her. And he doesn't even blame her for it, you know. He understands why because what he's asking is very serious. And but I love that exchange between them. But it was always in the script. Chris always intended for that.
But how do you make it so real? Because sometimes...
That's Annie. She's amazing.
How about you? Then your reaction was also very authentic. No, you know, we couldn't tell at all that it was spontaneous, something that just came up naturally on the scene, or...
Chris and I talked about it after it happened the first time, and because Odysseus, it's not a painful slap. It wouldn't be an issue of pain. He's more concerned about his wife.
But I'm struck since yesterday how young you look now.
Oh.
But on some of the scenes you look so weathered and old, you know. How is that possible? And was it making the film in such a hard way? Was that what it did to you?
Well, in some ways, yeah. All of that weather and all of that salt water and all of that we all were pretty weather beaten on the movie. But then there are three distinct phases in Odysseus's life that are covered, and he's a young man, he's a middle-aged man, he's my age, and then he's older. And so for the older things, they have techniques with stipple, and aging, where they'll stretch the skin and put glue and then release it and give you more wrinkles and things like that. Yeah, it's very, very wonderful makeup artist. When I went to do press and I hadn't seen John Leguizamo, who plays Eumaeus in the film, I hadn't seen him for a long time, and I walked into the room and the first thing I said was, "You're so young," because I'd been used to seeing him with white hair.
The magic of film.
The magic of film.
You had so much tough treatment in the film, and everything that a man could suffer, you pretty much suffered. Was there a moment when you really have to do some psychological work so that because it's at the end of your limit? Was there ever a moment like that?
I would think about it every morning. I would really want to just set my intention for the day and then stretch a little bit to get my body ready and then go to work. But the fact was, everything that was happening to me on screen was happening to everybody else off screen. And so I'm looking at my friends who are trying to do this very ambitious movie. We're trying to fulfill Chris's vision, and we were all out there together. There was a lot of comfort in that, in feeling that the group was going through it together. And Chris, if we were ever cold and wet, you could just look and, it's not like Chris had a special place to go. He was just as cold and just as wet. And there was a pride, I think, in all of us in not complaining ever.
Chris gets the finest craftsmen in the world at what they do, and then he asks everybody to push the envelope. That's the thing that's exciting about these pictures, is you can feel everybody straining to do better than they've done before, to just fulfill what's being asked of them.
And you certainly showed that leadership on the screen. You were like the anchor on set. What do you make of the assessment? He said you have to be in certain time in your life and your career to be able to do this role. How do you understand that?
I think what the character is grappling with internally, I would not have understood. I would have understood it intellectually, but to express it and to feel it and to live it and to express it.
What is it that the character was grappling with?
Odysseus is a character who has made many mistakes, and he's living with the consequences of those decisions that he's made. And I think once you get to middle age, no matter who you are, you'll have reflected on those. You'll be carrying those. And the character needed to look like he was carrying something.
Maybe does that explain the scene where he was just kind of lying on the raft and let the waves take him? What does that scene say in the sequence of what you were just talking about?
It's the one thing that he's never done, which is
he always fought.
Yeah, he always fought his fate, and he has to give himself up. He has to surrender, and he can't go home until he surrenders. Yeah.
But what's the moral in that? That we should surrender, or that we should let life carry us?
I think it's that we can control the things that we can control, but we have to be at peace with what we can't control. And we'll be in a battle with ourselves until we can find acceptance in the places where we need to find acceptance.
Well, maybe because he can do that because he had fought the hardest. Do you remember the moment when he said, "I don't really want to go to home"? And that line kind of stayed with some people. This is a film about homecoming. What do you mean you didn't want to go home?
It's one of to me, the great ideas in Chris's adaptation. Historically, we've thought of it as he's doing everything he can to get home. But is he, right?
There is a but.
That's up for the audience to decide. Oh, well, what would that mean?
How could it mean otherwise? I mean, isn't homecoming in Western, Eastern culture, in Chinese culture especially, like the most important thing, you know, almost in life?
Without question, and this is the foundational homecoming story, but I thought it was a very interesting idea. In fact, the first thing he's going to need to do when he goes home is to face his wife and to be honest about what he's done. And so until he can accept what he's done, there's something keeping him, because of course the siren song tells him that he doesn't want to go home. And that's the first time that he hears that. It's a radical idea.
What kind of roles do you want to explore going forward, having played Odysseus?
I don't know if I'll ever see a role as wonderful as this one. It's a really spectacular.
Spectacular. Would you call the defining role of your life, or some other word?
You know, in Western literature, it's such an iconic role, and the chance to play that was really a privilege. And going forward, I really will keep choosing projects based on the director. For me, at this point, I've read so many thousands and thousands of screenplays, and I've written so many screenplays that something gives me a feeling when I read something. You know, I'm less analytical and more intuitive about it.
Will your intuition ever bring you to China again?
I hope so. I really hope so, yeah. We had an amazing experience here. We lived here for half a year. We were in Beijing for a lot of it. We were in Qingdao. At the end, we were in the desert with the painted mountains. I mean, it was such an extraordinary time in our lives and such an extraordinary experience for my whole family. So I would love to come back. Yeah.
Well, we'll be welcoming you.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yeah. Once again, congratulations to a wonderful piece of work. And it's been a pleasure to talk to you.
My pleasure too. Thanks.
Thank you.
After years of war, no one could stand between my men and home.
That was my exclusive interview with Christopher Nolan, the Oscar-winning director, and Matt Damon, the Oscar-winning actor in the film The Odyssey. With that, we come to the end of this special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook, X, and YouTube using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got The Point.